So the avatar set's fully revealed, and you're walking into Cardboard Brewing Company looking for some unique brews from the set, huh? Well, you came to the right place, because I've got some pretty fun ideas for you. Have you ever wanted to eliminate a player using a grandmother? Now's your chance. Gran is in the game. Gran's a 1-mana 1/2 human peasant ally. And it says whenever Gran becomes tapped, you draw a card, then discard a card. Also, non-creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast as long as there are 3 or more lesson cards in your graveyard. Now, Gran doesn't seem like much, and it's not, but this deck is hilarious because we're going to make Gran a Voltron deck and punch some players in the face with Grandma. It's going to be great. It's going to be so funny. And it works really well in this deck because Gran, when she becomes tapped, you get to loot. And every time you attack, you're tapping Gran, right? And so on every attack phase that you attack with Gran, you get to dig a little bit further into your deck and try to find something that's going to progress your game plan. Also, we can go down the lesson plan a little bit here because if we put lesson cards into our graveyard using Gran's ability to draw a card, discard a card, we don't even have to cast the lesson cards if we don't want to. We can. We're going to put lessons in the deck that are worth casting, but if we don't want to cast it that turn and we want to make our stuff cheaper, we can just throw the card in the graveyard using Gran's ability. And the ability to make non-creature spells cheaper is great because we're going to just strap on a bunch of equipment on Gran, and all of that equipment is non-creature spells. And so we can start playing our really high-power equipment spells for cheaper to be able to get more on the battlefield to give to Gran and let her go to town. The lesson cards that I pulled out are Accumulate Wisdom, Boomerang Basics, Mercurial Transformation, Octopus Form, Teachings of the Archaics, Water Whip, Waterbender's Restoration, Waterbending Lesson, Whirlwind Technique, Secret of Bloodbending, Aang's Journey, and Environmental Sciences. I think that these cards are worth casting if you get them, but lessons aren't as strong as regular cards. That's kind of what makes them set apart, is that they're generic sorceries. So you never have to cast these. But waterbending cards in this deck are actually really, really good. Waterbending's new from Avatar, and you can tap creatures and artifacts to pay for waterbending spells. And so Gran's going to have a whole bunch of equipment on the battlefield. You could start just tapping the equipment since that won't change the function of the equipment in any way to then have some more mana to be able to cast the waterbending lessons that we have. So now we got to figure out what we're giving to Gran. What is she going to punch players with? And really, you can go down any Voltron route here. There's a whole bunch of really good equipment. But I went through all the equipment and picked out some that I think are particularly good for Gran. But obviously, you want more than these in the deck. So grab your best Sword ofs and throw them in the deck as well. But I think you could start with Sword of the Animist, which is a very great ramp card. We have to remember that we're in mono blue. And so giving Gran a Sword of the Animist to be able to add more lands to our battlefield is very good. Sword of the Animist runs a pretty penny nowadays. And so a cheaper alternative is to look at Goldvein Pick and Prying Blade, or run all three. Honestly, getting some more ramp cards on equipment is pretty great. But Goldvein Pick and Prying Blade are great budget alternatives if you don't have a Sword of the Animist. The Reality Chip is not only an equipment that we want to have on Gran, but when she's not around, we can swing with it as a creature, which is pretty great. The Reality Chip on its own is going to let you look at the top card of your library at any time, which is actually really powerful with Gran's ability, because then we'll know when we want to go into the attack phase and use Gran's looting ability to draw a card, discard a card. The Reality Chip, when it's equipped to a creature, gives the ability to play lands and cast spells from the top of our library, which is awesome. That's like pseudo card draw on the Reality Chip. The problem is that we can only play 1 land per turn, more than likely, in a mono blue deck. And so whenever you get that second land show up at the top of your deck, that's when you want to go into the attack phase, use Gran's looting ability to draw a card, discard a card, finish combat, and then you can go back to casting spells off the top of your deck till you hit another land. I think Reality Chip is a really good fit here in Gran. It's going to work pretty well. I'm also a really big fan of the Conformer Shuriken from the Final Fantasy set. It's a 2-mana equipment with 2 equip, and it gives the equipped creature, whenever this creature attacks, tap target creature defending player controls. If that creature has greater power than this creature, put a number of +1/+1 counters on this creature equal to the difference. Remember, Gran's a 1 power creature. She's kind of feeble. But if we give her a giant shuriken and tap down the biggest creature on the defending player's board, we can now grow Gran's power very quickly. She's got the gains really quick. And so Conformer Shuriken's going to be able to not only make Gran stronger, it's going to also tap down their biggest blocker, which is fantastic. And it's going to speed up the clock for when we can get our Voltron win, because Grand Grand's not going to take 21 turns to kill a player at 1 power. But the tap ability on Conformer Shuriken is worth running as well. Even if you don't hit a creature that's going to grow Grand Grand, being able to tap down their biggest blocker is pretty nice. Diviner's Wand is another equipment that's used in a lot of decks, but it's kind of interesting here in Grand Grand. 3 mana equipment with equip 3, so it's a little expendy to get it on Grand Grand, but it gives Grand Grand, whenever you draw a card, this creature gets +1/+1 against flying until end of turn, and you could pay 4 to draw a card. So it's pretty sick to put this on Grand Grand, because on attack, she's already drawing a card and discarding cards, so Grand Grand grows by +1/+1 and gets flying. So now you're over the top of a lot of blockers, and if you happen to have a lot of extra mana, then you can spend the 4 to draw more cards, or if you draw more cards before combat, which is a good thing to do with this equipment, then you can make Grand Grand huge. But at the very minimum, Diviner's Wand is going to give you a bonus power and toughness to Grand Grand on her attack ability and give her flying, which is pretty great. And the last one I'll talk about here for equipment is the Wrecking Ball Arm, which is really funny to think about, giving Grand Grand a Wrecking Ball Arm. It's a 2 mana equipment, and you get to equip it to a legendary creature for 3 mana. Otherwise, it's 7 equip for any other creature. But it gives the equipped creature base power and toughness 7/7. And they can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. So Grand Grand's going to get super strong very quickly, going from 1 power to 7 power, which changes your Voltron kill clock from 21 turns to 3 turns, just with 1 equipment, which is pretty nice. It also gives some evasion to Grand Grand, so she doesn't get chump blocked by a bunch of tokens. She's going to be taking out some big monsters, which is pretty great. So I would check this one out. I think it's a good fit for her. And outside of the equipment and the lesson package, we should add a few more cards to the deck to kind of fill it out. Some cards that let you reduce the cost of artifacts are worth running. You could look at Ethereum Sculptor, Foundry Inspector, Cloud Key, Joyo's Familiar. They're going to get you a lot of equipment on the battlefield quickly. I'd also look at Emery, Lurker of the Loch. That's a card that's going to hit the battlefield for a pretty cheap cost, and it's going to return equipment that your opponents don't like giving Grand Grand back from the graveyard onto the battlefield. Works out pretty good there. I also think you should check out the new Waterbender Ascension card, 2 mana enchantment that says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you put a quest counter on this enchantment. Then, if it has 4 or more quest counters on it, you draw a card. Now, remember that this triggers for every creature that deals combat damage, not just Grand Grand, right? And so if you have multiple creatures on the battlefield, you could power up Waterbending Ascension very quickly, and then every creature that hits for damage is drawing you a card, which is pretty nice once you get to 4 quest counters on it. But it also has Waterbend for 4. Remember, Waterbend, we can tap creatures and artifacts to pay for Waterbend. And so now all of our equipment can be tapped at no extra cost, because tapping equipment doesn't change the function of the equipment. And now you can make a creature unable to block this turn, which helps Grand Grand a lot in getting some damage in. I think this deck is super funny. I'm actually really pumped to make a Grand Grand deck and to eliminate a player with it. I have a couple achievements I want to do with this deck, which I'll talk about in another video sometime for achievements. But one of the achievements I want to get is to give Grand Grand a Colossus Hammer and hit somebody with that. I think that's so funny. I think there's just a lot of flavor in this deck that makes it really goofy, because we're playing Magic, which has a bunch of fantasy themes, and equipping them all to Grandma. So if you enjoy the humor, as well as a deck that you can really do some serious damage with, grab Grand Grand, give her a bunch of swords, and see how it goes. A Grand Grand smacking players for lethal is really funny, and the rest of the ideas on this video are also pretty great too. But take a second to punch your loyalty card by hitting the like button. Doing so is going to give your loyalty card like bending. It's an ability that where you can spend your punches on your card to change its shape. The new shape is up to you, but triangles aren't allowed. Well, we talked about a mono blue card. Now let's talk about a mono green card. The Earth King is here. The Earth King is a 4 mana 2/2, a human noble ally that says when the Earth King enters, create a 4/4 green bear creature token. It also says whenever 1 or more creatures you control with power 4 or greater attack, you search your library for up to that many basic lands, put them on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your deck. Now, let's put this in layman's terms real quick. What Earth King is saying is that when Earth King enters, you make a 4/4. And that token is great because whenever you attack with a power 4 or greater creature, you get to search your library for a basic land. And that's per creature that's power 4 or greater. So if you have 3 power 4 or greater creatures on your board, and you attack with all 3 of them, then the Earth King is going to let you search your library for 3 basic lands and put them on the battlefield tapped. Pretty cool ability. It's actually kind of bonkers. So I was looking at how to make this deck really interesting, because the really easy route is to just stuff your deck full of power 4 creatures or greater and put them on the battlefield and ramp into them because you're in mono green. And that's fun, but like what's more fun is to blink the Earth King. And so I've got Earth King blink deck in mono green, which is kind of goofy. It's pretty silly, but it's kind of fun. Let me show you what I'm thinking of here. We got to start with the blink spells, and blink in mono green is really hard to come by, like really tough. White is the color that you want to go for blink mostly, but in green, your blink spells don't say exile, then return to the battlefield. They say return a creature to your hand. That's what most of them are. The card that most people know as green bounce is Temur Sabertooth, which is also a combo card, so it can get a little spendy to find this card. It's a 4-mana 4/3 cat that says you could pay 2 mana and return another creature you control to its owner's hand, and then if you do, Temur Sabertooth gains indestructible turn to turn. It's a great way to bounce the Earth King to your hand, give Temur Sabertooth indestructible, and if you play the Earth King after you bounce it in the same turn, you're going to make another 4/4 bear creature when the Earth King enters, and you can attack with the Temur Sabertooth, which is a 4-power creature, to then get you a basic land. So it works out really well there. Plus, the Sabertooth is also indestructible that turn that you bounced it. And so it's very protected to attack. It doesn't matter if it hits for damage or not. You just need the attack trigger to go get your basic land. There are a bunch of other cards that will return creatures to your hand, though Temur Sabertooth is your best one in terms of synergy. But the card I really like a lot is Mistbreath Elder, mostly because it's cheap mana. Mistbreath Elder is 1 mana for a 2/2, and it says at the beginning of your upkeep, return another creature you control to its owner's hand. If you do, you put a +1/+1 counter on Mistbreath Elder. Otherwise, you may return Mistbreath Elder to its owner's hand. Like I said, this card is great because it costs 1 mana, and you don't have to pay any more mana to bounce a creature. The downside is that you can only get to do this on your upkeep 1 time. Where Temur Sabertooth, if you have a lot of mana, and we're in mono green, so that's not that hard to get, you can bounce the Earth King multiple times and play it multiple times in 1 turn. And the nice thing about Mistbreath Elder is that over time, you could get Mistbreath Elder up to 4 power from its own ability by bouncing the Earth King. Once you do that twice, Mistbreath Elder's at a 4/4 with the 1/1 counters on it, and now you get to go search your library for a land when you attack with it with Earth King on the board. It's kind of cool. But Mistbreath Elder is going to give you 1 extra bounce per turn, and there's a few other cards that do that as well. You can look at Cloudstone Curio, which is a really expensive in terms of dollar amount artifact. But whenever you make that bear token with the Earth King by entering, you can just bounce the Earth King back to your hand and then play it again, which is super sick. Conjurer's Closet's going to give you a bounce at the end of turn. Voyager's Staff is a really cheap artifact, but you only get to do it 1 time. But it does the exile, then return to battlefield effect. Golden Argosy is on attack trigger where you can blink the stuff that you crew with it, which is pretty cool. You've got Roaring Primidox, which is literally Mistbreath Elder, but more mana expensive than the Mistbreath Elder. Erratic Portal, Umbiculus, Blood Clock, Sanctum of Eternity. There's a bunch of stuff here, right? And so those are your core blink spells, and the goal is to get as many of them usable as you can, because if you can blink Earth King multiple times, you don't have to have a whole bunch of 4-power creatures in your deck to get his ability. You're just going to have a whole bunch of bear tokens, and that works out pretty good too. One of the cards that you have to put in this deck, though, it's just banana crazy good, is Strionic Resonator. I've talked about this card a few times in other videos, but of all the cards I've talked about where it goes really well, this is the best one so far. Strionic Resonator is a 2-mana artifact that says pay 2, tap it, and copy target triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. So you can use Strionic Resonator to copy the second ability on the Earth King where you get to look for basic lands, which is kind of crazy, right? Even just for 1 creature attacking, that bear token that you make, you attack with it, you pay 2 and tap Strionic Resonator, and now that bear is going to search you 2 basic lands on the battlefield, which essentially paid for the Strionic Resonator activation, right? And then if you have any more creatures on the battlefield that you're doing that effect with, holy mackerel. It's crazy. You're ramping really hard at that point with that trigger. It's pretty cool. Another really fantastic card in the Earth King is Azuri's Predation. It's an 8-mana sorcery, which is a little bit expensive, but you're ramping pretty hard in this deck. It's not hard to get to. And it says for each creature your opponents control, you create a 4/4 green Phyrexian Beast creature token, and each of those tokens fights a different one of those creatures. So in simpler terms, if your opponents have 10 1/1 tokens on the board and that's it, and you cast Azuri's Predation, you're going to make 10 4/4 Phyrexian Beast creature tokens. Then each of those tokens are going to fight one of the 1/1 tokens from your opponents, meaning it's a board wipe and you keep all the 4/4s. Now, your 4/4s will die to anything bigger than 4 power on your opponent's board, but you're going to gain a whole bunch of 4/4 creatures, which is fantastic. And then you just attack with them the next turn with Earth King on the board. And you're basically searching out all of your basic lands from your deck because you're making so many. It's really, really good. The benefit of blinking the Earth King in this deck and why I think it's a really fun thing is not only is it different than what every other Earth King deck is going to look like, but it's also a great way to keep the Earth King protected, right? If you're blinking the deck and you have ways to do it instant speed like Temur Sabertooth, it's really hard to remove the Earth King. And then you can just play it again for 4 mana forever, basically the whole game, because the Earth King's not dying very easily. You're not paying commander tax on top of it often. And so having Blink is a great way to keep Earth King on the board, as well as to get a bunch of cheap activations to make the 4/4 bear token that he makes when he enters. Give this deck a shot. Let me know how many lands you get in one turn with Earth King's ability. All right, on to one of the headliner legendary creatures. I've been seeing this card all over social media since the set was revealed, since the card was revealed. Fire Lord Azula, a 4 mana 4/4 human noble in Grixis colors. Fire Lord Azula has Fire Bending 2, which says whenever this creature attacks, you make 2 red mana, but that mana only lasts until the end of combat, then it goes away. The card also says whenever you cast a spell while Fire Lord Azula is attacking, you copy that spell. You may choose new targets for that copy, which is crazy. I don't know if you can really screw up this deck. You can kind of build it in any way you wanted to, because copying any spell is very powerful, and you're doing this for free. You just have to attack. There's no extra mana cost. And really, you're getting mana to you because you're making 2 mana on the combat step, right? So you're gaining some mana and copying spells. It's crazy good. But I wanted to do something different than what everyone else is doing, because I'm seeing this card in a lot of like CEDH circles too. It's making its rounds there because it's so powerful. I want to make something that's more like Bracket 2. Make something that's really fun to play and make something that your opponents have never seen before with Fire Lord Azula and do something different. So I went down the curse theme. The whole deck is full of curses, and the idea is that you could put curses out twice on every attack phase, or based on your mana, right? You can cast as many curses as you can in one combat step, and then just double them up on players or spread them out to the whole table. Curses are an enchantment aura that you actually target on a player, and usually those auras are bad things for that player or good things for that player's opponents. And the downside to curses is that they get removed quickly because nobody wants them on their board, and they're kind of expensive to cast. Like usually they're like 4 to 5 mana, so you're maybe casting 1 curse per turn. Fire Lord Azula lets you turn up the heat a little bit, no pun intended, where you can cast multiple curses because you're getting 2 mana on the attack with the Firebending ability, and you're copying your spells every time you cast a curse. So you can double them up on one player, making them hard to remove because they might only be able to remove 1 enchantment, but you put 2 on them. Or you could spread them out, right, and have curses on everybody a lot easier. What you do with the curses and how you double them up or spread them out is totally dependent on the curse, right? Some curses you want to just load up on one player so that every time you attack that player, you get all of these curse triggers, which is super cool. But sometimes you want to have these effects that trigger on every person's upkeep. So you might spread those out to every one of your opponents so that they all trigger on every person's turn, right? The first card that we want to look at is Curse of Misfortune, which is one that you're probably going to want to double up on one player, honestly, but it kind of depends on what you're running the deck. It's called Curse of Misfortune. It's a 5 mana curse that says that at the beginning of your upkeep, you may search your library for a curse card that doesn't have the same name as a curse attached to enchanted player. Put it on the battlefield attached to that player, then shuffle your library. So in really simple forms, on your turn, meaning you, not the player who's cursed, on your turn, because you control the curse, you're going to tutor a curse out of your deck, and you're going to put it on the player that has Curse of Misfortunes on them. Now, if we double this up with Fire Lord Azula, you could put 2 on one player, and now you're tutoring up 2 cards on your upkeep, and you get to put those 2 curses on that player, which is pretty cool. Depending on the curses that you're thinking about, though, you might want to split this up and put it on 2 separate players because they'll both trigger on your upkeep, so it totally depends on you. But this is going to get you more curses out of your deck, which in a Grixis deck is a pretty nice thing to do because you don't have to go looking for the cards in your deck to then play them. If they're in your graveyard eventually, getting those cards back isn't that big of a deal in a Grixis deck. But tutoring the card's also just really good. It lets you put out more curses in one turn than you're going to do with just Fire Lord Azula. A really powerful curse that's been around for a little while is Curse of Opulence. It's a really cheap one too. 1 mana, you put it on a player. Whenever enchanted player is attacked, you create a gold token, and then each opponent attacking that player does the same thing. And a gold token is a better treasure token. You don't have to tap it. You just sacrifice it, and you get 1 mana of any color. Curse of Opulence is really interesting because if you double these up on one player, so you put it on one opponent, you put 2 of them on there, any player that attacks that player, you're making 2 gold tokens anytime that player is attacked, right? If you attack them, you're making 2 gold tokens. If your buddy next door attacks them, they're making 2 gold tokens and you're making 2 gold tokens. And so the mana goes kind of crazy, except for the player who's cursed, which is pretty fun. This is definitely a curse I would stack up on one player because you want as many attack that player triggers as you can get. The downside is that if your opponents don't attack that player, you're not getting as much gold, but at least you have the needle pointing at the player you need to get gold from, which is kind of fun. This card can also be kind of dangerous, though, too. It'll speed up the game for your opponents as well, besides the player who's cursed, because you're giving them extra mana, but it's fun, you know. It's a good time. And these next 2 curses are ones that are really going to hamper a player's game really quickly until they get rid of the curse even. The Curse of Fool's Wisdom is a 6 mana curse. It's a little bit expensive, but it says whenever enchanted player draws a card, they lose 2 life and you gain 2 life. And it's got madness on there, so if you have a way to discard a card, then you could discard this one and pay 4 for it instead of paying 6. But either way, for decks that like to draw a lot of cards, this is a way to really neuter that deck and say, hey, you got too many cards going through your hand. So I'm either going to stop you from drawing cards, which is what this curse essentially says. It basically is saying you only get to draw 1 card a turn and that's it, because you're not going to want to take the damage and give me the life. But if you do end up wanting to draw a lot of cards in a turn, I'm going to dome you for every card you draw for 2, and then I get to gain 2 life. It's pretty great. The player that's drawing a lot of cards has to find a way to get rid of this enchantment, or they're just going to die to it. And the other one's similar, the Trespasser's Curse, a lot cheaper, 2 mana for this one. But you put it on a player, and that player has a curse that says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under the enchanted player's control, that player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And so this is going to totally hamper the token decks. The players who are making a lot of tokens on a turn or doing aristocrat kind of stuff, and they're just putting a bunch of stuff on the board, this is going to make them feel the pain of making all of those tokens that they're going to use for resources later. And so that player really has to find a way to get rid of this curse, or they're going to end up like hitting themselves a lot, or gaining you a ton of life and letting you run away with the game. It's pretty nice. There are a ton of curses in the game, but the last one I'll talk about is Curse of Vengeance, because I think this card goes really, really well in Fire Lord Azula because of how many curses you're putting on players. Curse of Vengeance is a 1 mana curse that you put on a player, and it says whenever the enchanted player casts a spell, you put a spike counter on Curse of Vengeance. Then, whenever the enchanted player loses the game, you gain X life and draw X cards, where X is the number of spike counters on Curse of Vengeance. This curse is awesome to double up on one player, and then put all of the curses that you play in a game on that player. So you're just making them lose faster than everybody else, which is great because Curse of Vengeance, when you get 2 of those triggers when that player loses to draw X cards and gain X life twice, you're basically running away with the game at that point, right? You're putting your thumb on one player to make the game harder for them to win. And when you eliminate them, you gain so many resources to get back in the game or to take over the game that now you're playing against the other 2 players in the game to then put the curses on afterwards. I think Curse of Vengeance is super strong in Fire Lord Azula because you're copying it and you just stack as many as you can on one player. You may have been listening to this the whole time thinking, but Tails, how do you put curses on a player during combat? Well, that's the gimmick of the deck, right? You need to give your curses flash in order to cast them during combat because you can't otherwise double them with Fire Lord Azula. So here's some cards that are going to give your curses flash. High Fae Trickster, Leyline of Anticipation, Tidal Barracuda, Valley Floodcaller, Vidalcan Orrery, and Emergence Zone is where I would look at to get some flash speed on your curses. And then the deck, you need to have probably a couple tutors or some way to find those cards because your deck kind of flounders until you get flash and curses. Doesn't mean you can't cast curses outside of flash because you're still going to get the curse ability, but you only get 1 of that card, right? Instead of 2. And getting 2 is like way better. And so it feels like this deck's going to be playing some kind of control to keep you safe until you get a flash enabling card. And then you cast Fire Lord Azula because you don't want Fire Lord Azula to die before you get your flash enabler. Get 1 attack phase in and then dump curses everywhere and just go until Fire Lord Azula dies again. Now, there is a curse-themed Grixis commander that exists already. Lind the Cheerful Tormentor deals with curses. I think Lind is really good in the 99. Because I think Lind is not as good as Fire Lord Azula when it comes to curses. Lind does the curse thing. It's all about curses, but you're still only doing 1 curse per turn, really. Lind is going to let you get curses back from your graveyard, which is what Fire Lord Azula needs, a way to return these curses that get destroyed eventually. So putting Lind into your deck is a great idea. Let Fire Lord Azula copy them all, and then let Lind get them back when they get taken care of. And the last card I'll talk about here is the Doomwake Giant. I think this is a good include in the deck because you're doing a lot of enchantment stuff with the curses. Doomwake Giant is a 5-mana 4/6 that says whenever it or another enchantment you control enters, creatures your opponents control get -1/-1 till end of turn. And remember that you're doing this on the copy as well, right? So if you cast a curse with Firelord Azula during the combat step, you're making 2 of them, and they're both enchantments. So now you're giving all of your opponent's creatures -2/-2 till end of turn if you only cast 1 enchantment during that combat. The reason why this is good is the obvious: you clear out the weenies, right? You get rid of all the 1/1s and the 2/2s. But it also makes your attack phase with Azula safer, because Azula's a 4/4, which is pretty decent, but it's not the best. And you don't want to get chump blocked by something bigger than Azula so that you lose her or you can't attack with her. Doomwake Giant's going to let you get in for more combat steps with Azula, because now your opponent's creatures have to be 6 power in order to take out Azula in combat, because Doomwake Giant's going to reduce their power and toughness by -2/-2 with the curse, right? Having 6 power on your opponent's board all the time is a pretty big ask, right? Anything smaller than that, it doesn't matter if Azula gets chump blocked. As long as Azula doesn't die, you're doing what the deck wants. You're not necessarily looking to wipe the board with Doomwake Giant. So I think it's a good fit here. Firelord Azula is a very strong card from the set. Like I said, you really can't mess up this card, but I wanted to do something really different. I think curses are a really good spot to do with Firelord Azula. You're going to catch your opponents off guard with this one, though you'll have to get through the commander politics of, oh my gosh, he's running Firelord Azula, we have to take him out first. So good luck on that. All right, I have to admit something here, because we're getting into a card that I don't know how to pronounce, because I never watched Avatar. I saw like 3 episodes. I don't even know who many of these characters are. I apologize, but the cards are really cool. I'm very, very happy with the cards. So give me a little bit of grace here, because I don't know how to pronounce his name, but this guy is called Professor Z, Professor Zay, Professor Zai, Professor E. I don't know. You guys let me know in the comments what that is. Professor Z is a 2-mana 0/3 human advisor ally in Izzet. And the cool part with this card is that it's Izzet hybrid. So you can either cast this for 2 blue, 2 red, or 1 of each, which is really nice, really flexible for your mana base. Professor Z has the ability to tap and discard a card, then draw a card, which is kind of nice. You get into your deck a little bit deeper, which is what this deck is going to want to do. The other ability is what we're building around, though. You could pay 1 and tap Professor Z, then sacrifice him, and you get to return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand, but you can only activate this during your turn. So Professor Z is going to let you cast instant and sorceries multiple times, because you're going to get it back from your graveyard and use it again. And so we better pick a card that's worth casting multiple times. And so this deck is called Epic Experiment Deck. Epic Experiment is a sorcery that has Izzet colors plus X, and it says you exile the top X cards of your library. You may cast instant and sorcery spells with mana value X or less from among them without paying their mana cost. Then put all cards exiled this way that weren't cast into your graveyard. So let me break this down a little bit easier to understand. If you declare 5 as X, so you're paying a total of 7 mana for Epic Experiment, you're going to exile the top 5 cards of your deck. Then you're going to cast any instant and sorcery from among them that costs 5 mana or less for free, right? Because you're paying 5 mana one time for the Epic Experiment, but then you get to cast all the 5 mana or less cards for free after that are instants and sorceries. When you cast an instant or sorcery this way, it goes into your graveyard because you're casting the card. You're not casting a copy of it. So that card goes to your graveyard. Then every other card that you reveal from those 5 cards that isn't an instant or sorcery goes into your graveyard. So essentially, this card is saying mill 5 or mill X, right? Cast all your instant and sorceries that cost X or less, then put everything in your graveyard. Professor Z is great for this card because you get to cast it multiple times, right? We want to have X be as big as possible so we can rifle through our deck as fast as we can, right? Cast as many spells as we possibly can, and then do it again. You just pay 1 mana and sack Professor Z, and then you get to get Epic Experiment back again for the next turn and spend all your mana on Epic Experiment again, which is pretty cool. So what are we going to put in this deck to make it work? What's going to happen with it? Well, you could put pretty much any instant or sorcery in here and it's going to work really, really well. Like, seriously, you could really run anything because casting a bunch of spells for free on a turn, and at free is in quotes, right? Because you paid X, so it cost you something, but you're not casting all of those spells for their actual mana cost. You can literally put in anything. I would definitely start with your ritual cards, right? So cards like High Tide, Magma Geyser, Desperate Ritual, Inner Fire, Path of the Pyromancer, Pyretic Ritual, Seething Song. They're going to give you more mana than what it costs to cast them. And it's really good in this deck because, one, if you're casting those cards out of your hand, it's a free spell that gets you free mana. because you always go up in mana with those cards. Then you get to use that free mana to put into Epic Experiment to make a X cost bigger than what you actually had, which is great. But the flip side is also true. If you reveal these cards off the top of your deck with Epic Experiment, you get a bunch of mana, which then you can use to either sack Professor Z to get Epic Experiment back in your hand, or replay Professor Z because you sacked him to get Epic Experiment this turn, and now you have extra mana to put Professor Z back on the battlefield. And so those rituals work in both instances of the Epic Experiment side of the card. Whether you're exiling off the top of your deck or whether you're playing it from your hand, it works in both ways. Like I said, it doesn't really matter what instant and sorceries you run in this deck. You can kind of go down any route, just whatever cards seem fun to you that you want to cast a whole bunch of them, because we're not going to necessarily win with the instance and sorcery cards. We're going to win with effects that trigger when we cast instance and sorceries. So we're going to look at things like Gutter Snipe, which is a classic. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, you're going to hit your opponents for 2 damage. And that works for Epic Experiment itself, the card, and for every card you cast from Epic Experiment. And so you can imagine if you've got that X is 5 and you cast 5 instant or sorceries from the top of your deck, that's like high rolling, right? But if you do, that means you cast 6 instant or sorceries that turn. You're hitting all of your opponents for 12 damage. That's pretty awesome. And that's just one turn. You could also look at a favorite of mine, the Sphinx Bone Wand, which is more mana expensive, but it will end the game faster than Gutter Snipe will. Sphinx Bone Wand is a 7 mana artifact that says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, you put a charge counter on it, then you deal damage to any target equal to the number of charge counters on it. And so Epic Experiment plus all the instant sorceries that Epic Experiment casts will trigger and put a charge counter on for every spell. And so if that X equals 5 is back again and we cast 5 spells, it's actually 6 spells, 1 for Epic Experiment and 5 for the spells. You get 6 triggers of Sphinx Bone Wand. And so you'll do 1 damage once, then 2 damage once, then 3 damage once, then 4 damage once, then 5 damage once, then 6 damage once, which is a total of 21 damage. And you could send that anywhere. It's really, really strong. And God forbid you have both of these cards in play at the same time. For instant sorceries that you could look at, though, I would definitely look at cards that have flashback on them, because all of the cards from Epic Experiment are going into your graveyard. And so now you have more ways to use those spells after you Epic Experiment them into your graveyard, right? Epic Experiment is kind of like a mill card. And so you want to be able to use the cards that you mill in your graveyard again. Some ones worth considering are Increasing Vengeance, Galvanic Iteration, Deep Analysis, Mystic Retrieval, Sorceress's Schemes, Past in Flames, and particularly Galvanic Iteration. Galvanic Iteration is a way for you to copy your Epic Experiment. So you could do 2 in 1 turn, and it copies the X that you already paid. So if you have 9 mana on a turn, and you make X is 5 for Epic Experiment, that's a total of 7 mana, but then you cast Galvanic Iteration to copy it at X is 5, and now you've got 2 Epic Experiments at X is 5, which is huge. And your Galvanic Iteration basically made you a really cheap X is 5 Epic Experiment in 1 turn. And you can flash it back later and do it again. It's really, really strong. And then lastly, I would probably look at Command Beacon. And this is a little bit of an expensive of a land, but it taps for colorless, or you could tap it and sacrifice it to put your commander into your hand from the command zone. Commander Z is going to get really expensive to cast from the command zone. So Command Beacon is going to give you a turn or a cast of Commander Z for 2 mana instead of like 6 or 8 later on in the game if you sack them a lot. So I would grab that one for sure. I have a plan for this deck that's not fully fleshed out yet, but once it is, I'll have it all together, where Professor Z is the only creature in the deck, and the rest of the deck is lands and instants and sorceries and maybe a couple artifacts. That's like the really goofy deck where you just do straight instant sorceries and you hit Epic Experiment like value like crazy in the deck, but it's really weak in terms of blockers. So we'll see what happens with it, but it should be really fun. I hope you guys have a good time with Epic Experiment.deck. I think it would work really well with Professor Z to be able to cast so many of them in 1 game. Last call, and this is the last commander on the list, and I could talk about this deck a long time, but I'm not going to. I'll try to keep things short. I have so many cards that you can put in this deck, but I'll pick out my favorites for it. We're going to look at Toph. Like I said, I don't know how these names are pronounced. I'm sorry. Toph, Hard-Headed Teacher. It's a 4 mana 3/4 in Gruul. It's a human warrior ally. It says whenever Toph enters, you may discard a card. If you do, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. Toph also says whenever you cast a spell, you earthbend 1. If that spell is a lesson, put an additional +1/+1 counter on that land. And I'm just telling you right up front, we're not running any lessons in this deck because it actually makes the deck weaker Earthbend 1 says you pick target land you control, and it becomes a 0/0 creature with haste that's still a land. Then you put a 1/1 counter on it. When it dies or is exiled, you return it to the battlefield tapped. So your land is safe, but you can use it as a creature that turn, and it's Earthbend 1. And we're picking this card specifically for this deck because of Earthbend 1. Earthbend in this set, you usually want bigger numbers that your lands can attack for huge amounts of damage, right? If you could get Earthbend 8, for example, you now have an 8/8 creature, right? But we want Earthbend 1 for what this deck is doing, because we're going to do a landfall deck. And I know you're like, oh my gosh, Tails, this is what Toph is doing all the time. But the difference with this deck versus every other Toph deck is we're doing landfall, but how we do landfall is what makes a difference. We're going to be doing a heavy sacrifice our own lands theme in this deck. The last line of Earthbend is what's really interesting here. If our land dies or is exiled while it's Earthbent, right, when it's a creature, you get to return it to the battlefield tapped, which means essentially you get an extra land drop that turn from that land that dies. So we just need a way to kill our own lands. And then we get to put it back on the battlefield and we trigger all of our landfall abilities, right? So we can look at cards like Zurin Orb, which is a 0 mana artifact that says sacrifice a land, you gain 2 life. So we picked the land that we animated with Earthbend from casting any spell. So if we have Toph on the battlefield and we cast Zurin Orb for 0, we get to Earthbend one of our lands. We put a 1/1 counter on it. It becomes a creature. Then we do whatever we want with that land. So maybe we attack with it that turn and we do 1 damage to somebody. Then we can sacrifice it and gain 2 life, and that land's going to come back on the battlefield tapped. So we just gain 2 life for free from Zurin Orb. And that doesn't include any card we have on the battlefield that says landfall. Because if we do have a creature on the battlefield that says landfall, when that land comes back from the Earthbend ability, from that land dying, it triggers the landfall ability, which is crazy. So we don't have to ramp like crazy in this deck. We just have to sack our own lands. So really what we're trying to do is cast a lot of spells on our turn, which makes this deck turn into a cantrip deck instead of a landfall ramp deck. And so we're trying to cast a ton to animate a bunch of lands, then sacrifice all of them, or as many that are animated anyways, to bring them back. And then all those lands are going to enter tapped and it's going to trigger all of our landfall effects. It's really cool. It's really cool. It also lets us play with some really interesting cards that we don't use in a lot of land decks that sacrifice your lands, because we want to sacrifice lands in this deck. Take a look at this card. You ever seen this one? This is Need for Speed. It's a 1 mana red enchantment that says sacrifice a land. Target creature gains haste until end of turn. That's a sick ability. That's really good. If we have anything on the board that's a decent power that we want to attack with that turn, we can just sack one of our animated lands to give it haste, and then we trigger landfall when that land comes back, and we got this big beater to attack with. It's cool. How about Raise? Another 1 mana card. It's a sorcery that says that you have to sack a land when you cast this card, but when you do, you destroy target land. So if you need to get rid of a Nykthos or a Gaia's Cradle from your opponent's board really cheaply, just sacrifice one of your animated lands. You get that land back anyways. And then you're going to nuke their land that's causing you a lot of problems. It's super fun. It's super fun. Now, the big thing that we're trying to do in this deck, though, is to have really cheap costs in order to sack our lands. We don't really want to use a bunch of sorceries, because that means we have to draw a bunch of cards to get those sorceries. We're losing card advantage by doing that. If we can use an effect that's on the board already to sacrifice our creatures that are lands, or vice versa, our lands that are creatures, and get big effects off of them, it goes really, really hard. And the best one for this deck, and why we want Earthbend 1, it's the number 1 reason why Toph making Earthbend 1 lands is so good, is Skull Clamp. Skull Clamp is a classic equipment, 1 colorless mana and 1 to equip, and it gives equipped creature +1/-1. So with our lands that are +1/+1 lands, they just instantly die when you equip it to them. But when that creature dies, you draw 2 cards. And that's exactly what this deck wants to do, is to sack its land, to then have the land come back and landfall trigger, right? And then you draw from it so that you can play more spells to animate more lands, to then just pay 1 mana and equip Skull Clamp to it and have those lands die to draw more cards. It's so good. But there are other sack effects that are good here too. You could look at Ashnod's Altar, Evolutionary Leap, Goblin Bombardment. Greater Good will drive some cards to it at a cost, but it's good. Some other cards that I look at, though, that are even better than that is like Fecundity. Fecundity is powerful, 3 mana, and it affects everybody, but it's going to do you more work. It says whenever a creature dies, that creature's controller may draw a card. And so now when your lands die, which is what you want to happen, you're going to draw a card from them dying as well. and trigger landfall. It's kind of crazy. And even better, this was kind of goofy, but it works really well. The Evendo Brush Razor is a 3-mana 2/2 insect warrior, and it says whenever you sacrifice a non-token permanent, exile the top card of your library. During your turn, as long as you sacrifice a non-token permanent this way, you may play land cards exiled with this creature. And then you can tap and sacrifice a land to add 2 red mana. It does everything we want. It's going to sacrifice a land once to get us some mana so we can cast more spells. And when we do that, we get to then exile the top card of our library, and we can play lands from them if we want, or cast them till the end of turn, which is sick. The downside here is only that you get to sacrifice 1 land. Like, we really want this guy to be like, don't tap him, you just sack a land and get 2 mana. That would be crazy for this card. But either way, this card's really, really good because it's going to do both things that we want in the Toph deck. It's going to let us sacrifice lands, it's going to give us mana, and it's going to give us card draw, all on 1 card, though, so we can do more stuff with Toph in 1 turn. Some other really good cantrips we can look at, though, that do the cantrip thing is Manamorphose. Manamorphose is the gold standard card for this deck, though, and cards that we're looking for to do in this deck. Manamorphose is 1 mana plus a hybrid red or green, so it's really flexible in mana cost. It's an instant that says you add 2 mana in any combination of colors. So it's literally a free instant. You pay 2, you get 2, and it draws you a card. And with Toph out, it also earthbends 1. And so you're playing a card for free and doing the earthbend thing for free, and hopefully you draw into another cantrip card that you can then do again with Toph. My all-time favorite card in Magic the Gathering, by a long shot, it outshines everything, is Burning Tree Emissary. It costs 2 mana, hybrid red and green for both of them. It's a 2/2 human shaman, and when it enters, you add red and green mana. So this is a cantrip creature without the draw, but it's the mana, right? You get the free mana, so it costs you nothing, but Toph still triggers the earthbend by casting this card, and you spent no mana to cast it. And now you have a 2/2 creature that you can use to sacrifice and do a bunch of abilities with as well. You could also look at cards like Explore, Elvish Visionary, Charge Through, or Expedite, Kenra's Transformation, Verdant Rebirth, Wall of Blossoms, Viridescent Wisp, Benefactor's Drought, and there's a bunch other cards that do the cantrip thing, but that'll get you started. They're really, really good for this deck. One thing I really like about this deck is running lands that sacrifice themselves. Then you don't have to do the Skull Clamp thing if you don't want to, or you don't have the card yet. Terramorphic Expanse goes crazy with Toph because if you animate it, it gives the card haste, so you can still tap it to sacrifice it and search your library for a basic land. But it also comes back on the battlefield tapped because it's animated with Earthbend. It's so now Terramorphic Expanse is just a free ramp card. It's rampant growth for 0. It's really cool. And you can pick any other sack land to do the same exact effect with. Think of things like fetch lands for those who have those. Fetch lands go crazy in this deck because you can search out the specific lands you want that have the basic land types on them. You're not limited to just basic lands, but any land that sacrifices itself is really good in this deck. And then I would probably look at cards like Orin Frostfang or Toski, so that you can give your attacking creatures a way to draw as well, because you can attack with your animated lands and you don't care if they die. If people block them, they just come back tapped and you're going to trigger all your landfall stuff. If they don't block them because they're just 1/1s and they want to block bigger stuff on your board so they don't take as much damage, you get to draw a card off those lands and then you just sack them after combat to get all the triggers. It works out pretty good. It's a good synergy for your lands. And I've now talked about so many cards for this deck that I think I'll just give you one more because I'm getting a little long here. But I've always wanted to make a Gimli Mournful Avenger deck. Gimli is a 3 mana Ingruel, 3/2 Dwarf Warrior that says Gimli Mournful Avenger has indestructible as long as 2 or more creatures died under your control this turn. He also has, whenever another creature you control dies, you put a +1/+1 counter on Gimli. When this ability resolves for the 3rd time this turn, Gimli fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. I think Gimli slots into the Toph deck perfectly. You're sacking your lands, which are also creatures, which makes Gimli get bigger and safer because he gets indestructible on the 2nd land that dies. And he becomes a removal spell on the 3rd land that dies in a turn because he gets to fight. And then you get to attack with them. So Gimli goes hard here. I want to do Gimli as a commander deck, but the whole deck is just making tokens and sacking tokens. That's just not that fun for me. I don't really like it that much. But in Toph, now you have a really interesting way to make Gimli strong. And the downside is that he's not in your command zone. And so you get to do it until somebody exiles him. But I think it's a really interesting card to add in your deck here, and it does a lot because he fights stuff and he gets really big. And I won't even mention the Scoot Swarm or the Omnath Locus of Rage or the Amulet of Vigor or Lotus Cobras or Titania Protector of Argoth that go crazy in this deck. You can figure out the landfall part on your own. But Toph is so interesting. It does so much stuff, and you really could just leave it at sacrifice lands to draw cards from like stuff like Skull Clamp and things like that. But the landfall is what pushes it over the edge because it's giving you free landfall triggers essentially without having to ramp like crazy and play all the ramp stuff or have a deck that looks exactly like every other landfall deck. This landfall deck is so different, even though you're going to get the same landfall effects. How you get them is what makes it really cool, and there's a lot of options for it. Earlier I said that I hadn't seen the Avatar series, and that's true, I haven't. But I've looked through the Avatar cards, and I want to make so many of these decks. I'm kind of a fan now. Maybe I'll have to go back and watch the show. Hope you enjoy your time with the Avatar set. Let me know what cards you're looking forward to the most, and we'll see you in the next one. Have a good one.